Criticism is not consent. Take Two Doctor Who review rolls on, and it's time to talk about the pyramid at the end of the world. It's funny looking back on it. What is now generally thought of as the Monk trilogy is pretty harshly maligned at this point by most folks who I see. It's generally dismissed, talked about in terms that are just like, oh, that thing. And it's kind of a shame because Extremis is great. And even this one, it's pretty good. I would say that this is very much a two-parter in that it really doesn't feel complete as a full experience, but it doesn't totally feel like a single story split into either. This does feel like some degree of resolution. The immediate issue is dealt with, but then another problem it promptly comes up that's going to be dealt with next episode. Now, Extremis, while it does sort of load the basis for these other two, I consider it to be a pretty self-contained viewing experience. This one, a little less so. It's still pretty good, though. I don't really have all that much to criticize because as far as telling the story that it's telling and setting up what's coming next, it's pretty solid. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with the two-parter, if one half does a really good job of setting up what comes next and then the other half drops the ball on it, yeah, you're not going to get a lot of people go, well, the first part was good, right? No, you're just going to get people doing what I usually do when I do like ranked lists and stuff, lumping it all together, treating it as one thing and going, ugh. But that sort of leans on the resolution, which is Lie of the Land, which we're not talking about today. Opening on this concept of a pyramid that they can tell is 5,000 years old, but wasn't there yesterday. That's a good, strong opening mystery. That's solid. I dig that. There's also a real good buildup of tension with this. I think little touches like having every single clock in the world become a doomsday clock, counting down, that really does a wonderful idea of just expanding the idea of how far this reaches. Because normally it's like you've got one person keeping track of how much time they've got left. Now, like literally anyone who has a clock can see time is running out. That's a really neat idea. I will say that I remember when I watched this the first time, I called the entire trajectory of the disease in the lab subplot very early on, and I don't know how much to criticize that though, because I don't think the episode is really trying to play it like a big surprise, because I mean, look, an alien species shows up and basically says, we will save you from a disaster, while at the same time showing us things going on in a lab and not explaining how the two are connected. It's not that hard to put two and two together. Given that, I feel like they still try and build tension out of that half of the story, and it doesn't really hold it up, because at least I felt it's way too easy to see where it's going. That being said, I really like Erica. I think Erica the Scientist is fantastic, and she probably goes on my list of people who I would have been really happy to see as companions. I thought she was a really interesting presence. It was a good performance. She had good rapport with Capaldi. Yeah, I would have liked to see more of her. So I enjoyed her quite a bit. I also like that we're still dealing with the lingering consequences of the Doctor's blindness, and that here, those consequences become very tangible and very direct. And honestly, the whole thing that goes on with his eyes and his blindness, I like see, on the one hand, the consequences are immediate. when he does what he does in Oxygen to save Bill because he loses his eyesight. But we're still watching dominoes fall because of that, which I appreciate. It's not just like one more thing he has to work around. It's actually what leads him into the situation that means he kind of loses at the end of this. That's nice. That's nicely plotted. That's nicely worked out. And it has already established that while it can come up with like the layout of the room, what's here, what's there, it can't read things. He can see the shape of something, but he can't read the numbers. So Erica can tell him all day long what the combination is. He'll never get it. And that is that loophole, that weakness, that hole in what the glasses are able to do for his sight has already been established. So it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. And I also really like his reaction, especially when he kind of has to own up to Bill that he's now gonna die because of this. His exact words were,
"I've made a mistake. I have to face that."
Which, seeing that from the Doctor at all is kind of a good thing, but especially coming on the heels of Series 9 and what happened with Clara. And as much as I have my issues with Hellbent, this feels like a really good character moment because he watched Clara and Face the Raven make a mistake and have to face the consequences of that. And then 2 episodes later, he spent that entire episode refusing to accept the consequences that had already happened. So to see him take this more mature approach, and granted, it's not the exact same thing, and the Doctor has always kind of been more willing to sacrifice himself than to sacrifice other people. Like, I get that. But just knowing that the idea of facing the consequences of a mistake was something that was the core of so many problems, not just like writing problems that I didn't like, but like problems for the character. In the last series, this really feels like a nice evolution, possibly even resolution on that aspect of Capaldi's Doctor. So I like that quite a bit. I love the whole idea that the monks can only take over with consent. And while I don't think the eventual payoff of the specifics of this actually mean much, doesn't feel as justified as I would like, I do enjoy the concept of pure consent. Because early on, all these other people saying, yes, we consent, and the monks, no. And then killing these people. But fear is not consent. Strategy is not consent. And then with Bill wanting nothing but to save the Doctor, love is consent. And granted that this whole thing is absolutely a manipulated scenario, and the monks do know what they're doing, and have arrived here at this moment in time for the purposes of manipulating consent. I do still just in general really like the idea of demanding consent, but it can't just be saying the words. You have to mean it, and you have to mean it for the right reasons. If you're gonna use a term like consent, which in these days feels like a term that means a lot more than it used to, it's nice to see it as a concept treated with that kind of gravity and that kind of precision. Broadly speaking, while I did criticize the lab thing a little bit for its predictability, I do like the idea that what's going to end the world isn't the invasion. It isn't the big thing that the Doctor can see coming and stop, or that Unit could track, or Torchwood could fight. It's just a small little thing. It's a simple mistake in a lab. The world ends because of one little mistake that nobody would have had the power to see or to stop, except the monks see it, and they say they can stop it. So I like that as a notion. It's really hard, I think, to pull off the idea of someone who and have it feel properly resonant that people who quote unquote don't matter bring about the end of the world. When you have a show that feels like it is always dealing with like the movers, the shakers, the history makers of actual history and these alien planets and obviously the Doctor himself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to have it boil down to just a couple of scientists that almost nobody even knows that they're working in a lab. I kind of like that. And that's sort of where I am for the most part on this. I kind of like it. I think it is good, but it is also, while a semi-complete experience, I would say, because like, if I were to compare it to a two-parter like, say, the Zygon Invasion, Zygon Inversion, that just feels like one story cut in half. Or even, yeah, I say that as if it's a bad thing, but even like two-parters that I really love, like, say, The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit, they feel like that too. This does feel more akin to episode and then setting up sequel to episode, but because it immediately sets up a whole new problem that must be dealt with, it doesn't have the full satisfaction and the closure in this one. So it does still have that two-parter feeling, and as a result, even though I like this one as a thing unto itself, how well it's ultimately going to go down is going to depend heavily on what the next episode is like. And the next episode is Lie of the Land, which, well, tune in next week to get my more detailed thoughts on that. My memory of it is... So, tune in next week and check that out. In the meantime, I have a Patreon. It's what pays the bills and keeps the lights on and allows me to eat. Any amount you're able to contribute is appreciated. You do get perks such as access to Patreon exclusive Discord, early access to videos, the ability to see my docket in advance to see what I have coming up, and also to vote on potential subjects on occasion as well. Even if you're not able to support me on there, all the usual stuff, the liking, the sharing, the subscribing, all of that helps as well. But don't feel too much pressure to do any of it. Because at the end of the day, you're the council, I'm only running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned with your consent.